Well, the Palestinians are accusing Israel of war crimes. Israel is accusing the Palestinians of terrorism. Now one of the world's most respected jurists on behalf of the United States, nations, concludes that both are right. And neither side is happy about the result of that. Members of the U.S. Congress today are about to pass a law forcing the Obama administration to put on a blindfold and pretend that up is down. How can we have a peace process that works when nobody's even willing to discuss the truth of recent events? With us on the telephone, Jeremy Ben-Ami. He's the executive director of jstreet.org, the pro-Israel Jewish lobby in Washington, D.C. Am I characterizing you accurately, Jeremy?
Right, we like to call ourselves pro-Israel, pro-peace lobby.
Excellent, thank you. And welcome back to the program, by the way. It's been about a year, I think, since we had you and Ray on.
That's right. Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you here with us. And also coming in on Skype, I believe, is Ray.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, Ray Hanania is coming in on Skype from Chicago. He's on RadioChicagoland.com. He's a columnist with the Arab News and host of a morning radio show in Chicago on WJJG, and a political columnist with the Chicago Southwest News Herald, and perhaps most importantly for this conversation, a Palestinian American. And Ray, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Tom, and it's great to be able to talk to Jeremy. I really admire what he's been trying to do over the past year.
Thank you, and thanks for being here. And Ray, you have a website of your own too, don't you? Would you like to plug that or mention that?
Well, I write for this new Palestinian website, an Arab website called PalestineNote.com, and it's brought together a lot of the progressive centrist writers in the Arab community, and I think that's what brings all of us together. That's great.
PalestineNote.com. Thank you, Ray. Congressman Keith Ellison, who is a Muslim American, the first, I think, Muslim member of Congress, and has been on this program a number of times, he writes today in his blog, he represents Minnesota's 5th District, he says, Judge Goldstone, speaking of this report that I just mentioned, is no Israel basher. He's famous for apprehending Nazi criminals in Argentina, for serving as chief prosecutor on the UN International Criminal Tribunals, and for chairing the Independent International Commission on Kosovo. He is motivated by a struggle against apartheid in South Africa. A self-described Zionist, he serves as a trustee of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and has said that bringing war criminals to justice stems from the lessons of the Holocaust. 4 sections of his report deal with abuses by Hamas in that part of the world, and the report explicitly states that these rocket attacks against Israel are war crimes. Jeremy Ben-Ami with jstreet.org. Jeremy, what's your take on the Goldstone report, and what are your thoughts on this effort by some members of Congress to make the administration ignore it?
Well, our first position on this is that the first place that should start with an investigation is the government of Israel. Whenever there have been violations, whenever there have been accusations in the past, when Israel's military has been called into question, every single time the government has launched an independent, credible investigation. It is a democracy, or at least till now it has acted as one. It has held its defense ministers and top generals accountable. People like Ariel Sharon have lost their jobs at times because of things that were done. And so our position is that the best place for this to be dealt with is not in the U.S. Congress, is not in the UN, but Israel itself has an obligation to look at these charges, take them seriously, and not slander and defame a judge or the process rather than dealing with the substance of the charges.
Do you see that happening, Jeremy?
Well, there is actually a debate in Israel. The deputy prime minister, who's a man named Dan Meridor, who comes from the right-wing Likud party, has actually called for such an investigation. 3 other ministers have as well. There's been a lively debate within the Netanyahu government. Yeah. And I worry that U.S. Congress action, like is planned for today, is very much going to sway the Israelis not to do anything. It's a very, very counterproductive action.
It's going to hurt that debate process.
It will.
I've spent a fair amount of time in Israel and several Arab countries in the region as well, and I can tell you, as you know, there is and always has been a large peace movement in Israel and a very loud and active debate. You read more of it in Haaretz than in the Jerusalem Post, but it's there in the media, in the Knesset. about these kinds of issues, and that debate, by and large, doesn't seem to make it into the American mainstream press, Jeremy.
Right, and that's one of the things that J Street is trying to change. We've been around for about 18 months now, and I think that we have begun the process of opening up the debate not only in national politics and in policy making in Washington, but also in the American Jewish community. And I think we've sparked some good arguments, some good conversations, some debate and dialogue, and I think we're beginning to see a little bit more space for this kind of conversation in the American Jewish community.
Ray Hanania, as a Palestinian American and a writer for ArabNotes.com and a keen observer of these issues, what's your take on the Goldstone report and how it should be dealt with both by Israel and by the essentially now two Palestinian governments in the West Bank and Gaza?
Well, I read through the Goldstone report, and it's terrible. But I have two
It's terrible.
issues.
How? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, some of the conduct that was cited by the Israeli military, some of the conduct cited by against Hamas, and I think Goldstone has great credentials, and when he says war crimes have taken place in Kosovo and in Rwanda. And now he says in this war between Israel and Gaza, I think his words have to be taken seriously. Now, the only area that I disagree with Jeremy in is the area of allowing Israel to do the investigation. Personally, I don't, as much as they're a democracy, I think they're limited by their politics in terms of what is applied, under democracy and what isn't. And I don't think they would do a comprehensive job. They've been debating this for over a year and a half, and something should have been addressed, sooner, after this happened at the beginning of the year in 2008,
Right.
At the end of 2008 and 2009. However, on the Palestinian side, I don't view the Goldstone report as something that we should use to beat up on Israelis and Jews. I think the Goldstone
it beats up on Hamas as well. And by the way, let me just, if I may interrupt you just for a moment, and let our listeners and viewers on Free Speech TV as well know that if you have questions for either of our guests, they're going to stick around over the next break, and they'll be with us. You can give us a call at 866-987-THOM, 866-987-THOM if you have a call, a question for one of our guests. Ray, back to you.
No, I was just going to say that I think we need to look at what happened in Gaza. I think the Congress should definitely stay out of it, but it shouldn't be used as a bludgeon against Israel, and Jews by Arabs, and it shouldn't be used as a opportunity to criticize Arabs as being anti-Semites because we criticize Israel. Both sides are taking this to the extreme, but I think we need to bring it back to the center and look at what happened and deal with it, not use it as a definition for everything that happens in the Middle East, because if we do ever achieve peace, Gaza will not be the problem.
Yeah,
we will resolve it.
Jeremy, we just have a minute until the break here. Your thoughts on Ray's comment? It does seem that Israel is sometimes hamstrung by their own internal politics.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, but the history on these independent commissions until this point in time actually has been quite good, and Israel's accountability.
Israeli independent commissions.
In terms of having independent investigations and accountability for this kind of activity. So I think it is a sad statement if we've gotten to the point where Israel can no longer do that. I hope that we haven't gotten there, and I do believe that there are former Supreme Court justices and former other judicial figures in Israel who could lead an independent investigation that would be credible in international eyes.
But it's not happening yet, is there? Do you think that Hillary Clinton's words are going to push it?
It certainly hasn't been helpful, what's happened.
Okay, well, we'll pick that up right after this break. We have Jeremy Ben-Ami with jstreet.org and Ray Hanania, who writes for ArabNotes.com. Is that right, Ray?
PalestineNote.com.
PalestineNote. Note, not plural, singular.
Yes.
PalestineNote.com. Thank you, and we'll be right back.
This is the Thom.
So, Judge Goldstone, on behalf of the United Nations, has come out with this report suggesting that Israel committed war crimes, Hamas committed war crimes, both sides bear responsibility. There needs to be, I don't know what conclusion specifically I have not read it. Apparently, Jeremy and Ray have both read it. And so I'll defer to your comments on this. But on the one hand, it seems like, it's a great thing that this topic is being brought forward to the world. On the other hand, is this just going to be another thing that's going to blow up in our faces here? And PalestineNote.com, do I have that right?
Yes, thank you.
Ray Hanania, he's writing for over there, and Jeremy Ben-Ami, jstreet.org, the pro-Israel, pro-peace lobbying group in Washington, D.C. And Jeremy, well, actually, let me go to Ray first. Ray, your thoughts on the comment that we had from a listener here during the break, a free speech TV viewer, that the fight, as it were, and that's maybe the wrong word, but whatever, the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is so asymmetrical. I mean, Israel has a modern, well-equipped army and nuclear weapons and everything, and the Palestinians have a few rockets and stones. That is so asymmetrical that to even deal with this at the level of, okay, they both did something wrong is almost absurd.
I mean, I understand the caller's argument, and it sounds like she's very sympathetic to the Arabs, but I have to disagree with the intent. That I think the intent is to, hold Israel accountable and blame them. I do think they are responsible, but as a reporter for 30 years, covering Chicago politics and crime, I'll tell you there's no difference between a criminal who kills one person and a criminal who kills 50. We do come up with a different label. One is called a serial killer, one is called a murderer. Those crimes, you can't separate them and say one is worse than the other, therefore we focus on that. I really think the issue, again, is not the Goldstone report, because what we see happening is we're using it to attack Israel. Palestinians are getting worked up. They're getting emotional. They're using it to say Israel is bad. There are policies that are bad, but I don't believe Israel is bad. I don't believe the Palestinians are bad. I think the real focus, we got to get away from a no-win debate. Let the UN investigate it. I hope Israel investigates it too, but I think the bigger answer is define a new peace movement that brings us together so we don't have to have these Gaza conflicts anymore.
Yeah, well, wouldn't that be nice? Jeremy Ben-Ami with jstreet.org. Jeremy, your thoughts on that commentary and on what Ray just said? Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I got to push a button here to put Jeremy back on the line. Hey, Jeremy, I'm sorry.
No problem. I just want to second what Ray is saying, that I think the focus on the Goldstone report, both from the Palestinian side as well as from the Israeli side, where much effort has been launched at discrediting and defaming Judge Goldstone and to discredit the report, none of that really is of any use to those of us who are trying to figure out how to get a better future for the people in the Middle East. And I think that Ray's exactly right, that these are distractions used by those who really are not so interested in resolving this conflict and figuring out a two-state solution. I think the majority of the people on both sides just want this conflict to end, and we need some leadership, and hopefully it will come partly from President Obama and his team, partly from Americans like Ray and myself and others of all backgrounds who want to try to help their cousins and their friends and their family in the region to find a way to a better future, because this is not going to lead to anything but further violence and suffering and destruction.
Jeremy, what's the starting point? Who are the people who don't want there to be peace in the Middle East? I mean, this is such. You pointed out that the Human Rights Council, I think it was in the UN, about 80% of their work had been around Israel, and yet, it was Israel that Osama bin Laden cited in saying that was why he funded 9/11 in the United States. This is a conflict that goes beyond just a few million people in a little tiny geographic area. It's you've got Muslims in Indonesia and South Asia, yelling about the Palestinian cause as part of their rationale for blowing up buildings in Bali, and so. What are the interests against peace in your mind?
Well, yeah, I think that the extremists on all sides, I think that there are folks in the Palestinian community who do not want to see a Jewish homeland in any part of the land between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, and there are folks on the Israeli and Jewish side who would like to keep as much of the land as possible for themselves. And I think that the sad thing is that those people are a minority, and the political systems in both areas are really not extremely functional. They give too much power to minorities, particularly on the Israeli side, where coalition politics can really drive every government, to the extreme. And I think we need American leadership. And I think you're pointing out that America has a very strong interest in seeing this conflict resolved. It has. General Jones, who's President Obama's national security advisor, spoke at the J Street conference last week, and as he said, if he could advise the president to solve any one conflict in the world, it would be this one, because of the echoes and the ripples that spread out across the globe from the epicenter of this conflict. And it is used by extremists who, by the way, I don't think care for the Palestinian people and the cause, but are using it for their own purposes. And I think Ray would probably agree that the Palestinian people, have been a pawn and have been used by too many governments and too many movements to enhance their own political power, rather than caring about and helping the Palestinian people to get out of the camps and get to a home and have a state and resolve this conflict.
Right. So we need to be working all the way around. And I think this is interesting that yesterday Hillary Clinton walked back from her praise for Israel, saying that, okay, maybe the Palestinians, I'm paraphrasing, this is not her language, this is mine, but essentially saying, maybe the Palestinians have an argument here that by not stopping the settlement building as President Obama asked, but instead making an effort to, it's just not good enough. We'll continue this conversation in just a second. Stick around. We have Ray Hanania, who writes over at PalestineNote.com, a Palestinian-American and talk show host in Chicago on WJJG. And we have Jeremy Ben-Ami, who is the executive director of JStreet.org, a pro-Israel, pro-peace lobbying organization in Washington, D.C. And, guys, let's pick up some phone calls, okay?
Sure.
Okay. Stuart in West Seattle, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm a Jewish American. I grew up in a largely Jewish metropolitan area, and I've long figured out that my Jewish community is divided exactly as are any victims of abuse. Many, sadly, become abusers themselves. Others react by fighting abuse of all peoples. Some of us went down to fight for civil rights for the blacks in the U.S. South in the 50s and 60s, then fought to fight the Vietnam fight.
And several died.
Yes. We fought against U.S. involvement in the Vietnam in that war. We fought for social justice for all peoples ever since. Others of my Jewish brothers have supported the Israeli regime, right or wrong, that allied itself with the South African government, that has become a highly abusive government, at least the government, yes, highly abusive towards the Palestinian people, and they're repeating the very cycle of abuse that the worst of the Jewish experience had towards them.
Thank you, Stuart, for your comment. Jeremy Ben-Ami, your thoughts?
Well, I think that there is a lot to what your listener is saying in terms of how one reacts. The Jewish people have had millennia of persecution, and we don't need to recount all of the various stages of it. And I do think that there is a certain amount of psychological reaction to all of that plays out in the politics. So I think that there's elements of what he's saying that might be true. I think that the vast majority of Jewish Americans are basically progressive, liberal people on all issues, including this one, and favor two states and favor an end to the settlements and favor American diplomacy. And I think they're the rational base of the Obama presidency and the vote that got 78% in our community. And I think that there is a strong majority that thinks somewhat rationally on these issues. And
why then, Jeremy, has it been that the AIPAC crowd, for lack of a better way of describing it, the real, as you described them during the break, the Israel right or wrong, no matter what crowd, has dominated American public policy and the debate within the American media? But it may be that the latter is simply following the former, that the politicians have been principally following that group and that perspective. Is it Is it a matter of money? Is it a matter of just being very effective lobbyists? Is it, what's the deal?
Well, I think one of the things that is an interesting phenomenon in our community is that the folks who are deeply concerned about Israel and for whom this is the single most important issue do tend to be the people on the right, and they're the ones whose political engagement, whose lobbying, and sometimes whose professional employment when it comes to public advocacy is going to be around Israel. And those tend to be the people on the right. And the rest of us, who are more centrist and left, have been working on, global warming or ending poverty or human rights generally. This is one issue among many, and we haven't gotten it together to get this sort of radical center mobilized and organized and into a political power base the way that single-issue voters to the right have been.
And Jeremy, I'm curious your thoughts on the influence of fundamentalist Christians in all this. I know of some, and I actually know one, fundamentalist Christian evangelists who describe themselves as fanatical Zionists, but their real agenda is they want Israel to be in place. They're waiting for the rebuilding of the Second Temple, so that Jesus can come back, and so that all but 144,000 Jews can be destroyed, and they will be converted to Christianity. And that part somehow always gets dropped from the message, but they're very much embraced by many Israelis because they have, in many cases, a lot of political power and a lot of money here in the United States.
Yeah, no, that's been a big factor in the Washington political scene, although, again, as with all communities, it's important to say that there is a wide range of evangelical Christians, and, there's a small group that believes in that kind of an apocalyptic vision. There's a much larger base that really doesn't buy into that, eschatology, as it's called. Right. And, I think that we have to be careful not to label an entire community of any kind. And so I think there are some, far-right Christian Zionists who are very dangerous in their views, and I can't understand what the Jewish community leadership is doing in allying with them for the benefit of Israel. It doesn't make any sense.
Some of them are major powers in Congress, actually.
Right, and it really
subscribe to this.
It is an alliance that is counter to the morals and the values of our community at times. But again, there are many wonderful Christian and wonderful Muslim supporters of peace and of the existence of a Jewish home in Israel and of a Palestinian home in Palestine. And I don't want to cast aspersions on a religious group as a whole. But the political power of some of the far right Christian Zionists is a factor in Washington that is part of the explanation for why we are where we are.
Right, Ray Hanania, I'm curious, broadly your thoughts on the conversation that the caller and Jeremy and I just had, but also on how do we reach out, we as a nation, how do Americans reach out, or how should, in general, how should people who are not Muslim reach out to Palestinians and to the wider and broader Muslim and Arab, and I realize these are all subsets, all different groups, communities, and try to damp down or disenfranchise the radical elements within those communities, just like Jeremy just was talking about. The rational Jews coming forward and saying, no, this is our position with regard to Israel on the Jewish side.
Well, sadly, this is a conversation we had in the 90s. I remember meeting with President Clinton and participating in meetings with Clinton, Arafat, and Yitzhak Rabin, who I really admired. I always viewed Rabin as a terrorist until I saw him step forward and do what I felt was the right thing. The point is that, who is more responsible is not the formula for resolving this conflict. I mean, we do have to hold people accountable, but we can't make that the main issue. And we almost got away with that away from it back in the 90s. And what happened? Hamas used suicide bombings and terrorism not just to kill Israelis, but to destroy the peace process. What we need to do is go back to that mindset we had in the 90s. One, that peace is possible. Two, that the majority of Palestinians have given a moderate two-state solution that's fair and that deals with all the issues, will embrace it. But I think the difference, though, this time, I think Barack Obama is the new important factor in this whole thing. I think what he needs to do is push harder than anybody has ever pushed to force the Israelis to move back to the center and force the Arabs to let go of the anger that they feel about all the bad things that have happened to them and look toward the future. If we can do that, I think we can actually achieve peace. That's not an easy thing to do, but I think we got a better shot now than we ever have had in the past.
But there is one big difference. I spent a fair amount of time in the Middle East in the 80s and the 90s, and at that time, I used to be able to drive all the way up to the north of, go up to Carmel along the coast, or go to the Sea of Galilee, and then drive contiguously all the way down to Jericho, for example, in the far south. And no problem. I mean, there might have been some Jewish communities, but there weren't walls and checkpoints and all these kind of things. Occasionally, you'd see a soldier hitchhiking or something. In fact, we used to pick them up hitchhiking all the time. But the region has changed a lot in 20 years.
It has. But I believe a lot of that can change if we do achieve a peace accord.
Okay.
The wall will come down. A lot of settlements will disappear. If they want to keep some settlements, give us an equal amount of land, not 1 inch for 9 inches.
Okay.
So, there's a way to do it. I really believe peace is the answer. Fighting with each other, as much as I own 10 acres of land just outside Gilo in the West Bank on the Israeli side of the wall. I can't do anything with it because I happen to be Arab and a Christian. That bothers me tremendously, but my only hope is that if we have a peace accord, that issue will be resolved fairly. It won't be resolved by me strapping myself with a bomb or Jeremy getting a gun and shooting me. That is not going to resolve anything.
Yeah, we have just a minute to the break, and I know, Jeremy, you have to get going, so I want to let you have that time to fill in that. What do we do about the radical difference that we've all seen in that part of the Middle East over the last 20 and 30 years, the physical difference as well as the political difference?
Well, I think we've got to use it as an incentive to move and move now. I think that I don't know about Ray's view, but my view is that we really are up against the end of the window of opportunity. That this is it. And I am frequently saying that Barack Obama is really the last U.S. president that's going to have the chance to end this conflict in the way that we'd all want it to end. And, for those who seem to want the status quo to continue and who believe it's a victory to stop the peace process, I think the status quo is a formula for real nightmare. And the urgency that we're all feeling needs to be translated to the Israeli people, to the Palestinian people, and the sense of urgency in the administration, too.
Great. Jeremy, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I very much appreciate you dropping by. And Ray, can you stick around? We'll pick up a couple calls.
Yeah,
okay.
I'd love to.
Ray Hanania is with
Jeremy.
us. PalestineNote.com, and Jeremy, of course, jstreet.org. Get over there and check out his website. For many years, the talking point was that Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East, but then the Bush administration said, hey, how about having a vote in Gaza? And guess what? The people who were feeding people, the people who were providing cooking oil to people, the people who were providing old age pensions, and who were providing jobs and who were building schools got elected, although we call them terrorists. And, thus the experiment in democracy and its unintended consequences, or perhaps intended, I don't know. Ray Hanania is with us. He is a Palestinian American. He writes for PalestineNote.com as well as a talk show host on WJJG in Chicago. RadioChicagoland.com is that radio station's website. And, Ray, your thoughts on how Palestinians can take back or can move to a moderate position within the West Bank and Gaza, and the wider Palestinian diaspora. I'm mispronouncing that name, and I'm diaspora. Yeah, and what those of us who are not part of either of these communities can do to help, or do we just need to back up and get out of the way?
Well, when you look at the Arab community, they're like any community group. And because we have this burden of not, we feel like we are suffering. I mean, we feel like we're at the bottom of an imbalance. The balance is not in our favor. So we have all these views. And I think part of the problem is that we need to remember that the majority of Arabs want peace. I really believe that that is the bottom line. There are a small group of extremists that don't want peace. They want one state. They want the conflict. And these are extremists on both sides, Israelis, Arabs, Palestinians, and Jews. They share one thing. They both believe that if they can keep the conflict going, they have a chance to win, even if they're on the losing side of the battle.
Right.
I believe they're a small group, and what we need to do is give the majority of people who are angry and who look like they support that group out of emotion, we need to give them a choice again. And that choice has to be seeing a moderate Jewish American voice like J Street stand up and say, look, we support two states. We still believe in it.
Yeah.
Saying that does help us. And at the same time, listen, Arabs, we have this huge problem. We're like South America. You know, we're not like one cohesive national secular entity. Palestinians, Jordanians, Saudis, Syrians, we're like, you know, the difference between Bolivians and Chileans and Venezuelans and Colombians. Trying to get us to agree on something is not that easy, and it's not possible. I'm most worried, though, about the rise of Islamic I want to say religious extremism, because it's not about Islam. It's about individuals using Islam, and the rise of the secular rejectionists, and this one-state option is growing in popularity in the Arab community. If it overcomes the
By one state, you mean doing away with Israel?
Well, one state in the sense the way they explain it is, well, we'll just continue to grow in population. We reject two states because eventually we will become Israel and we'll just change the name.
Well, and this is you know, I believe
huge.
Right now the population, the Arab population of Israel of Israeli citizens is about 20%, isn't it?
Yeah, it's around 22%, and you know, the way they're treated, you know, they don't. I have relatives that live in Israel and relatives that live in the West Bank. I go there often. I know that deep down they're resentful of how they're treated, but at the same time, they're willing to put that aside if they can feel that there is going to be some hope. If nobody has hope, you know, we always turn to violence and we turn to rejection. And listening to people who are angry, I don't blame them. What happened in Gaza was terrible. And you know what? I mean, we could get into a whole debate about who started that. I believe Israel intentionally, not Israel, but the Israeli government intentionally started that conflict on the day of the election when Obama was being elected, and they ended it the day before he actually was sworn into office. That war was intended to try and redefine American politics, in my opinion. And I think, though, we could argue that if we want, but there's no answer to that argument.
Right. That is, I mean, quite literally, it's in the past. Clark watching Free Speech TV in Monmouth, Illinois. Hey, Clark, you're on the air with Ray Hanany and me.
Thanks. I had I'll be quick, 3 points. I've looked at the Goldstone report. I haven't read the entire thing, but I've looked at most of it. And it is stunning in his even-handedness, in spite of the point number 2, in spite of Israel's trying to obfuscate him at every point, and he even has letters, correspondence at the end that just make this so blatant. The third point is that I've looked at this resolution also, and it is so full of misrepresentation.
Yes, this congressional resolution. It is absolutely bizarre.
Thing.
Clark, we have just about 40 seconds here. Thank you for the call. Let me get Ray's response to that.
Listen, there's whether it's the Goldstone report, whether it's Mohammed al-Dura, whether it's the first Intifada, whether it's the second Intifada, we're always going to have this conflict as long as we have no peace. And yes, is Israel doing bad things? Yes. Are the Palestinians doing bad things? Yes. Maybe not as much as the Israelis are doing, but that's still a relative debate. We got to rise above that. The blame game is not the answer. It's hard to tell Palestinians. I take a lot of grief in my own community when I tell them we have to step back, not allow our emotions to dictate what we do. We can't get angry. we have to recognize that compromise is the only way we're going to save our people, because there is no hope in one state.
Yeah, very well said. Ray Hanania, PalestineNote.com, and of course Jeremy Ben-Ami was with us with jstreet.org, which is a great organization too. Ray, thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom. Great technology. I love the video stuff. You have a great day.
Great seeing you. Coming up tomorrow, Dan Gaynor and I will shake it up over corporations having the rights of free speech. Goes to the very heart and soul of democracy, allowing corporations to have rights. Are we doomed? Is there a way we can, as a nation, take that step? The Thom Hartmann Program, your radio support group for We the People. And don't forget, my friends, democracy begins with you. Get out there and get active. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, go to thomhartmann.com.
Okay, I'm here with Mittens the cat to discuss the amazing sale that PetFoodDirect.com is having on Fancy Feast canned cat food. Right now, you can buy Fancy Feast for just 48 cents per can. Okay, Mittens, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Meow once for yes, twice for no. Got it? Great. Mittens, don't you think 48 cents a can for Fancy Feast is an incredible deal? And isn't it quite impressive that PetFoodDirect.com carries all 52 flavors of Fancy Feast? Well, how does that make you feel? How many of those flavors do you like, Mittens? Okay, we get the picture. So how do you feel about people overpaying for pet food? I totally agree. Luckily, at PetFoodDirect.com, you'll find big savings on all your pet food and supplies, like toys, treats, litter, flea protection, and more. And they'll deliver it right to your door, which makes your life a whole lot easier. Pretty impressive, don't you think? I couldn't have said it better. Go to PetFoodDirect.com or call 877-PET-FOOD now to order Fancy Feast at 48 cents per can while supplies last.